Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we will take a look at some new Just No HOA content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
First one is titled, Their Plan Backfired Big Time. My parents owned about 30 acres of land in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska on the outskirts of town. My parents built their house in the late 80s and that's where I've lived my whole life. My parents passed away and I inherited the property and it's all my land or was my land. Back in 2005, this developer bought up a bunch of neighboring land and wanted to buy my land. I told him I was willing to sell 10 acres furthest from the house, the adjoining section to his neighborhood. He asked for 20 acres and I told him that the second 10 acres would be 3 times the price and he agreed and we signed the paperwork and he bought the land and I was paid for it. End of story, or so I thought. The land sat empty for over a decade since it took a while for him to sell the plots of land he made to home buyers and his company built houses. From about 2005 to 2012, the land sat empty and I didn't mind. I still mowed the grass and whatnot to keep it tidy, but never tried to take the land over or anything. By fall of last year he had finished the entire area and there's about 200 homes in that neighborhood. Unfortunately, they formed a HOA. Because of the neighborhood, my 10 acres is now worth about 10 to 20 times what it was originally worth and the HOA knows that. Since the September of 2017, I've had a bunch of angry letters and citations left on my property and in my mailbox. Some of them include having a barn larger than 7 by 7 feet. Having abandoned vehicles on my property, it's a project car shell that I'm working on. Having a non-conforming mailbox, still no idea what this is. Having the improper roof tiles, again, no idea. I ignored them and told the HOA members that I'm not part of their neighborhood and therefore have no reason to follow their ridiculous rules. The HOA says since my property values have gone up, I owe back dues from the date I sold my land, before there was even a single house built, and have to correct everything on the list. The back dues were over $10,000, plus from all the fines it would have cost me about $15,000 to $20,000 to fix my house. They said to either pay up or they will put a lien on my property and take it over. I went straight to my lawyer and we sent a HOA a cease and desist letter saying to stop contacting me unless they have actual signed documents that show I was part of a HOA. They never got back to me. I went out of town after that and came back to my mailbox missing. It was cut clear off the post with a chainsaw, wooden post with a metal mailbox on top. I repurchased an identical mailbox and set up cameras all over the property. My lawyer also uncovered something interesting. Turns out that the HOA wants to put in another community playground and a pool, clubhouse and they need land. They can't expand in any other direction since they're almost on the end of a highway on one side and the other sides are zoned for agriculture, so they decided they'd try to take over my land. Basically, they were trying to force me into the HOA to make them sell my land below market value. I went away for the holidays and I came back to find my project car was towed out of my driveway. My pond was emptied out and filled with gravel and sand and a fenced off 2 acres of my property closest to HOA. I immediately called the police and filed a report regarding the stolen property. The car was just an empty shell, so it's not worth a lot, maybe $2,500. But it's the principal of that prick president of the HOA. It had been 2 weeks since we sent the C&D and they didn't contact me in any way except this. I hired a local salvage company to come tear up the fence and they did it free of charge since I let them keep the fence to sell as scrap metal or whatever they do with it. My lawyer also suggested I send a letter demanding payment to fix my pond as it was filled in with gravel and sand. A local landscape company quoted me nearly $8,000 to get the pond back to the way it was. So the HOA board got a lawyer to respond to my C&D and they requested a meeting as soon as possible with my lawyer present as well. I didn't want to go, but my lawyer suggested me hear them out at least. At the meeting, I noticed their president and some of the higher-ups were not there. The board had no idea what was happening and their lawyer was just as confused as them. After I laid out my timeline of events, they thanked me for my time, accepted all the financial burden of replenishing my pond, missing car, couldn't locate it, and damages. I got checks for everything and got my pond restored, and I didn't really think much of it. I found out later from the new HOA president that it turns out the old president, treasurer and someone else had been stealing money from the coffers. They wanted my land to expand and put in a pool, clubhouse and etc., just as I saw on their website. The old board fined everyone a ton of money to get all the cash together and buy my land. Instead, they spent it on themselves. They needed my land somehow, so they thought they could just take over the land I wasn't using. Long story short, their entire plan fell apart after I fought back and brought to the other members of the HOA attention what they were doing. From what I've been told, they had to sell their house to pay back the HOA and have since moved away. The HOA has offered me market value for my land, and I do plan on selling since I really don't use the land for anything and the money isn't bad. Next one is titled, A Victory for the Little Guy. I helped a customer stand up to their HOA and win. I worked as a team supervisor for DirecTV at this time. Most of my duties were administrative, but if anyone on my team had an escalated call, supervisor requested, then those were my job too. One of my agents got a call, and from what he told me, the customer immediately requested a supervisor, that he needed someone with more authority than a frontline service rep. I take the call and the guy is frantic and asking me for help. He'd been going rounds with his HOA over the placement of his satellite dish. As it turned out, due to various obstructions, the only way his dish could be installed and maintain a quality signal was pole mounted. So it's on a pole in his side yard instead of on the roof side of the house. The HOA had deemed that a violation and fined him. They then threatened further proceedings against him when he refused to pay, something about violation of the HOA covenant agreement or some such nonsense like that. They had shown up this day to further the issue, and he decided to call us and see if there was anything we could do. Oh yes, there was. I asked if I could speak to the HOA representative that was in his home, and he was more than pleased to let me handle it. After introducing myself and whatnot, I informed the HOA representative that it is a violation of federal law to deny the homeowner the placement of their dish if that is the only place it could be installed to get a high-quality signal. The HOA representative instantly starts trying to tell me what's what when I just rattled off, over-the-air reception devices rule, of the Telecommunications Act 1996. What? The OTARD rule. It's a part of the Act 1 just named that explicitly forbids the restriction of placement of a signal reception device if that is the only feasible installation option. In short, you can't make him remove it, and if you force it he has options. I couldn't literally say he could take them to court since I'm not one of the corporate lawyers, but the point was made clear enough. He just handed the phone back to my customer and left the house. The customer was so freaking excited. You have no idea how much of a hassle this has been, fighting with them over this for months. The threats of fines, etc. Thank you so much. A victory for the little guy. Forget HOAs and their power-tripping little sycophants. Next one is titled, There Were Guards, Then There Was Postal. We moved about 18 years ago, and ever since the beginning we've had issues with parents dropping off underage, under 16, that is, kids with no supervision at our community pool for hours at a time. We've had issues with theft, vandalism and non-residents using the pool because for the first 10 years or so, the gate had a keypad which you had to input a number onto, and people were just giving out the number to anybody and everybody. And for the first couple of years, until the HOA caught on at least, we also had a public phone that could call anywhere, free of charge. People were using it to call long distance to Mexico and South America. When the HOA figured that out, they removed the phone and replaced it with one that can only dial 911. About 8 years ago, they also replaced the keypad lock with one that you have to scan a card to get in. Around the time they switched to the key card, they also started hiring security guards, not lifeguards, to keep an eye on things, which has been an up and down situation. We've had good guards and we've had guards, and then we had Postal, which was short for could go postal at any minute, which is something some of the residents tagged the guy with. Postal was a bad guard. Spectacularly bad. He would stop you at the gate and monologue at you, then get mad when you politely excused yourself and walked away. He got mad at me and my son on several occasions when we got up to drink from the water fountain, going on a rant about how the water was dirty, not fit for human consumption, going to make us sick, etc. It's not the best tasting water, but it's not dangerous. Postal also had a horrible habit of stalking around the parking area, all of about 6, maybe 10 spots total, and peering into the cars parked there to see what was inside. I got the feeling he was looking for something or maybe checking to see if they were unlocked for some reason. It creeped me out. He would get upset over things that were none of his business to get upset over. A friend of mine was at the pool with her daughters when another kid accidentally hit her in the head with a wet Nerf football. Postal decided it was his job, it was not, to yell at the kid whose football it was, screaming in the kid's face and freaking him out. Postal would go up to kids at the park, next door to the pool, and monologue at them, which made them and their parents uncomfortable. I heard that one night, he was there and there were some teenage girls goofing around on somebody's phone, taking video or something. He became enraged, thinking they were taping him, they weren't, and threatened to grab his phone and start taping them. His reaction freaked them out and they left. At the Labor Day pool party, hosted by the HOA, I went up to a board member and told him I'd caught Postal staring into my car again and it had made me really uncomfortable. Postal overheard me talking to the board member and sat for the rest of the party in his car sulking. Meanwhile, the board member proceeded to yell in my face about how I'd ruined everything. Me and all my complaints. While I had emailed the board about 24 times over the course of May through Labor Day, I wasn't the only one. There were probably a dozen residents, maybe more, who had been complaining about Postal's behavior over the summer. I thought that he'd be fired and that would be the end of it. The next summer, he had returned, however. The explanation I was given was that all the complaints had triggered his PTSD and because of that, the board not only felt compelled to hire him again but also to pay for his therapy bills. The dude was honestly a nightmare and had no business being a security guard anywhere. Next one is titled, Never Again. We unfortunately bought our first house in an HOA in California and we will never buy in an HOA again unless it is beachfront income property in Hawaii and the board seems to consist of reasonable people. The HOA we lived in had non-uniform enforcement of regulations and a board full of passive-aggressive personality types. Once there was a decree that everyone had to replace their garage doors because all of the board members had converted their units to a different door style. Another time they decreed everyone needed to have their units painted and originally said only one contractor could do it for the entire 48 houses with some sharing part of a wall with another neighborhood at a steep price of $5,000 per home, and these were small 1,400 square door one-story stucco buildings with minimal trim work. After protests and legal threats, it was discovered the contractor the board said would paint everyone's was a friend of the board president. I painted my own unit for the cost of paint and results were good. Others violated rules with no consequences. I would get a nasty letter if I was out of town for work and had cobwebs near my front door, that could only be seen if you were standing next to the door. Some units were allowed to be rented but not ours, so when we moved out of state due to a job change we couldn't rent it out after the real estate crash and it took 4 years to sell it because there were so many foreclosures. Never again. Last one is titled, When Taking Photos of the Deed Wasn't Enough, They Turned to Drastic Measures. We live in a condo and began receiving $100 fines for not picking up dog poop. The area behind our building is a common area and lots of people walk their dogs around. I offered to submit DNA testing for my dogs and they ignored me and continued to send notices of fines. I began taking my phone with me on every walk and took photos and videos of me picking up poop with timestamp evidence. I sent a folder full of photos to the HOA with photographic evidence that I was picking up after my dogs. We continued to receive fines. I got a small trash can and kept on my patio and began saving my bags of dog poop for 2 weeks. I did tie the bags, but they were still obviously smelly as poop bags are very thin plastic. I then mailed a box of poop to the HOA office along with copies of the time-stamped photos showing I had picked it up. I told them that I had better not ever receive another fine for dog poop because I had provided more than sufficient evidence that it wasn't us. Miraculously, the fines stopped and we haven't received any for over 2 years. Thanks for listening.